The courtroom was silent as Nathaniel Hawthorne, a billionaire real estate mogul, strutted in like he owned the place. Dressed in a custom-made Italian suit, his face bore a smug expression, as though the entire proceeding was a joke to him. He barely acknowledged the people around him, lawyers, reporters, even the guards who had escorted him inside. But the moment he saw the judge, his lips curled in barely concealed disdain. Judge Vanessa Carter sat at the bench, her presence commanding yet calm. She was the youngest and first black woman to serve as a federal judge in this district, and she had worked relentlessly to earn her seat. But she knew men like Nathaniel Hawthorne well, entitled, arrogant, and convinced their money made them untouchable. "Mr. Hawthorne, you may rise," the bailiff announced, but Hawthorne didn't move. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs lazily. His lawyer, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, whispered something to him, but Hawthorne simply smirked. "I don't stand for people who don't deserve my respect," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. A low murmur swept through the courtroom. Even the reporters who had covered countless trials were taken aback by his blatant disrespect. Judge Carter remained poised, her expression unreadable, but there was an unmistakable steel in her eyes. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said evenly, "this is a court of law. In my courtroom, all defendants will show the required decorum." Hawthorne chuckled under his breath. "Let's be honest, Your Honor," he said, emphasizing the title mockingly. "We both know I could buy my way out of this mess. So let's skip the formalities." Vanessa's fingers tightened around her gavel. She had spent her entire career dealing with powerful men who thought the rules didn't apply to them. But this was beyond arrogance. This was a challenge. She took a deep breath before speaking again. "Mr. Hawthorne, your blatant disregard for the court will have consequences. I suggest you reconsider your behavior." Nathaniel yawned exaggeratedly. "Do your worst." The tension in the room thickened. His legal team shifted uncomfortably, and even the guards exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't every day someone openly mocked a federal judge. Vanessa didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded toward the bailiff. "Very well," she said, her voice cool. "Bailiff, detain Mr. Hawthorne for contempt of court." A collective gasp rippled through the spectators. Hawthorne's smug expression faltered for the first time as two guards stepped forward. "Wait, what?" he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "You can't be serious." Vanessa didn't blink. "I'm very serious, Mr. Hawthorne. You seem to believe your wealth places you above the law. Consider this a reminder that it does not." The billionaire shot up from his seat, his face red with fury. "You can't do this. I have rights." The guards firmly grabbed his arms, their grip unyielding. His lawyer tried to protest, but Vanessa raised a hand, silencing him. "This court will not tolerate disrespect, no matter how wealthy or powerful the defendant may be," she said firmly. "You will spend the next 24 hours in a holding cell. Perhaps then you'll understand the importance of respect." As Hawthorne was dragged away, shouting about lawsuits and ruined reputations, Vanessa finally allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had dealt with arrogant men before, but none quite like him, and she had a feeling this was only the beginning. She tapped her gavel. "Court is adjourned." The reporters scribbled furiously, the courtroom still buzzing with disbelief. No one had ever dared to put a billionaire in his place like this before, and Vanessa Carter had just made history. Nathaniel Hawthorne sat on the cold metal bench in the holding cell, his jaw tight with fury. The billionaire who once commanded boardrooms and manipulated markets now found himself trapped in a dimly lit, musty cell. The sounds of distant voices and clanging bars filled the air, an environment he never thought he'd experience firsthand. His tailored suit felt like a prison uniform, his usual aura of power stripped away. "This is a joke," he muttered under his breath. "She can't do this." Across from him, a middle-aged man in an orange jumpsuit chuckled. "Looks like she just did." His name tag read D. Walker, and judging by his relaxed demeanor, this wasn't his first time in lockup. Nathaniel shot him a glare. "You don't know who I am." Walker smirked. "Oh, I know exactly who you are. Whole country knows by now. Arrogant billionaire refuses to stand for black judge." He shook his head. "Man, they are eating you alive on the news." Nathaniel's stomach twisted. He had built his reputation as an untouchable mogul, a master of PR spin. But this was different. He had expected Judge Carter to back down, to let his power and money do the talking. Instead, she had humiliated him in front of the entire world. His lawyer, David Wilkins, appeared on the other side of the bars looking exhausted. "You're making this worse, Nathaniel." "I'm making this worse?" Nathaniel shot back. "That woman is on a power trip. I'll have her off the bench before the week is over." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "Listen to me and listen carefully. You have bigger problems. The media is tearing you apart. Investors are pulling out of your latest projects. And worst of all, Judge Carter isn't budging." Nathaniel leaned against the wall, his mind racing. He had dealt with scandals before, but they had always been fixable. A few well-placed donations, a strategic public apology, and business continued as usual. But this wasn't just about money. It was about power. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one holding it. "She wants to make an example of me," he muttered. David nodded. "And she's succeeding." Nathaniel exhaled sharply, his fists clenching. "Then I need to hit back harder." David hesitated. "That's the worst thing you could do right now. You need to show remorse." Nathaniel scoffed. "I don't do remorse." David's expression hardened. "Then you're going to lose." The weight of those words sank in as the realization hit him. For once, money and influence wouldn't be enough. He had underestimated Judge Carter, and now he was paying the price. But if there was one thing Nathaniel Hawthorne never did, it was accept defeat. As he sat in the dimly lit cell, a new plan began forming in his mind. If Judge Carter thought she had won, she was sorely mistaken. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, Nathaniel Hawthorne was released from the holding cell, but the damage had already been done. As he stepped out of the courthouse, a swarm of reporters and photographers pounced, their cameras flashing like relentless lightning. "Mr. Hawthorne, do you regret your actions in court? Do you believe Judge Carter was justified? Will you apologize?" Nathaniel ignored them, his jaw set as he climbed into his waiting black SUV. His lawyer, David Wilkins, slid in beside him, checking his phone with a grim expression. "You've lost 4 major investors overnight," David said without looking up. 2 board members are calling for an emergency meeting. "And your company stock? Down nearly 10% since yesterday." Nathaniel exhaled sharply, his fingers drumming against his knee. "It's just a rough patch. It'll pass." David turned to him, frustration etched on his face. "Nathaniel, listen to yourself. You're acting like you're invincible. But for once, you're not in control." Nathaniel's eyes darkened. "Then I need to take back control." David hesitated. "How?" Nathaniel smirked. "I'm going to destroy Vanessa Carter." David blinked. "You what?" Nathaniel leaned back, his mind already calculating. "No judge is untouchable. She's young, ambitious. That means there are skeletons in her closet. I just have to find them." David ran a hand over his face. "Nathaniel, this is a suicidal move. If you go after her, it won't end well for you. She's not playing politics. She actually believes in what she does." Nathaniel's lips curled into a sneer. "Then she's naive, and naive people are easy to break." David didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. Nathaniel had made up his mind. Within hours, he had his private investigators digging into Vanessa Carter's past, her career, her finances, her personal life. If there was a weakness, he'd find it. What he didn't realize, however, was that Judge Carter was 2 steps ahead of him. And by the time he made his first move, she'd already prepared her counterattack. Nathaniel sat in his penthouse office, his gaze fixed on the skyline. His empire stretched across the city, towers that bore his name, properties that signified his dominance. But at that moment, none of it felt like power, because for the first time, he wasn't calling the shots. His phone buzzed. It was his lead investigator, Mark Ross. "We found something," Mark said, his voice laced with satisfaction. Nathaniel's smirk returned. "Go on." "Judge Carter's younger brother, Andre Carter, arrested a few years back on drug possession charges. Case was dismissed, but that means she pulled strings," Nathaniel finished. His mind was already working. A federal judge with a brother who had a criminal record? The headlines wrote themselves. Mark continued, "We're digging deeper. If she's ever misused her power, we'll find it. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Vanessa Carter thought she could humiliate him. Now he'd return the favor. But Vanessa wasn't an easy target. She sat in her office late into the night, sifting through reports, fully aware of what Nathaniel was trying to do. She had dealt with powerful men before, but none as reckless, none as desperate. Her phone rang. It was her longtime friend and political advisor, Denise Harper. "He's digging into your life," Denise said without preamble, "trying to use Andre against you." Vanessa exhaled. She had always feared her brother's past would be used against her. Andre had struggled, but he had turned his life around. And now, because of Nathaniel Hawthorne's bruised ego, those old wounds were being reopened. Denise's voice softened. "What's the move, V?" Vanessa clenched her jaw. "We fight back." The next morning, Nathaniel woke up to chaos. His phone was exploding with notifications. His assistant, Richard, rushed in, panic written all over his face. "Sir, you need to see this." He turned on the TV. "Breaking news. Billionaire Nathaniel Hawthorne under federal investigation for real estate corruption." Nathaniel's heart slammed against his ribs. The screen flashed images of documents, whistleblower testimonies, reports of bribery, illegal evictions, stuff he had buried long ago. He grabbed his phone and dialed Mark. "What the hell is this?" Mark's voice was tense. "Judge Carter, she's the one who pulled the trigger on the investigation. She had this dirt on you the whole time. She just waited." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. She hadn't just beaten him. She had played him. And now his entire empire was at risk of collapsing. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around his phone, his knuckles turning white. His empire, his carefully built legacy, was under siege. The woman he had underestimated had flipped the script on him, and now the wolves were circling. His lawyer, David Wilkins, barged into the office, his face pale with tension. "Nathaniel, we have a serious problem." "No kidding," Nathaniel muttered, staring at the television. The reporters were picking apart every piece of his business, dissecting decades of carefully concealed corruption. David slammed a folder onto the desk. "They're coming for you, and they're coming fast. The Justice Department just announced a formal investigation into your real estate dealings. This isn't just a bad news cycle. This could mean prison." Nathaniel's stomach twisted, but he didn't let it show. He had spent his life clawing his way to the top, bending the system to his will. He wasn't about to go down without a fight. "This is Carter's doing," he hissed. "She's been waiting for this moment." David nodded grimly. "She played you like a damn chess master. While you were digging into her, she was setting up your downfall." Nathaniel exhaled sharply, forcing his emotions down. Panic wouldn't help him. He needed control. He needed leverage. "Then we change the narrative," he said. "We make her the villain." David gave him a look. "Nathaniel, you don't get it. You're out of moves." The press conference room was packed. Reporters filled every seat, cameras rolled, and microphones stood poised to capture every word. The air buzzed with tension, the kind that came when a public figure was cornered, expected to defend themselves. But Vanessa Carter wasn't here to defend. She stepped up to the podium, composed, powerful, her eyes sweeping the crowd. She wasn't afraid, and she damn sure wasn't about to let a man like Nathaniel Hawthorne ruin what she had built. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady. "I stand before you today to address the baseless and fabricated allegations that have surfaced in the past 24 hours. The room fell silent. "I have spent my career upholding the law, and I refuse to allow a man facing serious criminal investigations to manipulate the system in a desperate attempt to save himself." Flashes of cameras lit up the room. The reporters leaned in. "These accusations," she continued, "are not only false, but they are also a calculated effort by Nathaniel Hawthorne to distract from the real story, the federal investigation into his corrupt business dealings." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Vanessa's gaze hardened. "Mr. Hawthorne is a man used to power, used to money shielding him from consequences. But the law does not bend for billionaires. Not in my courtroom, not in this country." A loud commotion erupted from the back of the room. Nathaniel Hawthorne himself had just entered. Dressed in his signature expensive suit, he strolled in like he owned the place. Ignoring the gasps and whispers around him, He stopped at the front row, arms crossed, smirking. Vanessa met his gaze head-on. Their silent battle played out in that moment, his arrogance against her unwavering will. "Any further questions?" she asked, not breaking eye contact. A reporter raised a hand. "Judge Carter, what do you say to those who believe there may be some truth to these allegations?" Vanessa's expression didn't change. "I say this. Nathaniel Hawthorne is a desperate man, and desperate men lie." Nathaniel let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head as if amused. But behind those cold blue eyes, Vanessa saw it. Rage, fear, desperation. And that's when she knew. She had him. He had thrown his hardest punch, and she was still standing. Nathaniel sat in the back of his limo, gripping the armrest so tightly his fingers ached. The press conference hadn't gone as he'd planned. He expected Judge Carter to be flustered, defensive, maybe even step down. Instead, she had turned the attack back on him, making him look weak. And worst of all, she had been right. The moment she said, "Nathaniel Hawthorne is a desperate man, and desperate men lie," the entire room had shifted. The reporters, the cameras, the headlines, they all belonged to her now. Mark's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "We lost control of the narrative." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. "I noticed. Stocks down another 5%, more board members want out, and the DOJ just confirmed they're expanding the investigation." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. "Expanding?" Mark hesitated. "They're looking into overseas accounts, shell companies. If they find what I think they're looking for..." Nathaniel knew exactly what that meant. It meant prison. For the first time, real fear gripped him. He had always believed he was untouchable. Money had always solved his problems. But Vanessa Carter wasn't a problem he could buy off. And now he was out of time. Meanwhile, Vanessa Carter sat in her office, staring at the reports flooding in. The DOJ was closing in on Nathaniel Hawthorne, and this time, there was no escape for him. Denise entered, arms crossed. "He's spiraling." Vanessa nodded. "I know." "He's got two options," Denise continued. "Run or fight dirtier." Vanessa exhaled. She had spent her career taking on powerful men who thought they could outmaneuver the system. Nathaniel Hawthorne was the worst of them all, ruthless, entitled, and dangerously unpredictable. But he had underestimated her, and now the walls were closing in. Denise's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then at Vanessa. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing it over. Vanessa looked down. A new headline flashed across the screen. "Breaking news. Billionaire Nathaniel Hawthorne caught in secret meeting with foreign operatives. Federal indictment imminent." Vanessa's lips pressed into a firm line. It was over. Nathaniel Hawthorne was finished. Nathaniel Hawthorne's world was collapsing. He sat alone in his penthouse, the city skyline stretching before him like a kingdom he was about to lose. His phone, once his greatest weapon, now felt like a dead weight in his hand. His lawyers had stopped calling with solutions. His investors had abandoned him. The Department of Justice had enough evidence to put him away for decades. And the worst part? Vanessa Carter had won. The woman he had dismissed, disrespected, and tried to destroy had stood firm while he fell apart. He had underestimated her strength, her intelligence, her ability to outplay him at his own game. Now he was out of moves. His phone buzzed one last time. A message from David Wilkins, his lawyer. "Plea deal on the table. Take it before they bury you." Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Pleading guilty would mean admitting he had lost. Admitting that, for the first time in his life, his money and influence couldn't save him. The thought made his stomach churn. But then he saw it. The news feed at the bottom of the TV screen. Nathaniel Hawthorne faces up to 30 years in prison if convicted. He closed his eyes. He had no choice. The next morning, Vanessa Carter arrived at the courthouse with her head held high. The halls were buzzing with anticipation. Today was the day Nathaniel Hawthorne would stand before her again. But this time, there would be no arrogance, no smug defiance, just a man who had finally been forced to face reality. The courtroom filled quickly. Reporters, spectators, even former business associates of Hawthorne had come to witness the moment. Then the doors opened. Nathaniel Hawthorne walked in, escorted by federal agents. Gone was the tailored suit, the arrogant smirk, The man who once believed he was untouchable. He looked thinner, his shoulders stiff, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. For the first time, he stood when the bailiff ordered him to, and for the first time, he addressed Vanessa Carter with respect. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet, almost resigned, "I accept the plea deal." A hush fell over the courtroom. Vanessa studied him for a long moment. He had spent so much time trying to break her, yet here he was, broken. She picked up her gavel. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice strong, unwavering, "the court accepts your guilty plea." She struck the gavel down, and just like that, the mighty had fallen. Nathaniel Hawthorne was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his once proud stride reduced to a slow, defeated shuffle. The cameras outside flashed wildly, capturing the moment that no one thought possible. The billionaire who believed himself untouchable was finally brought to justice. Vanessa Carter watched him go, her expression unreadable. She wasn't one for gloating. She didn't need to celebrate. The victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced by power, to those who believed the law should serve all, not just the wealthy and privileged. As she stepped out onto the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. But she didn't need to say anything. The truth had already spoken for itself. Nathaniel Hawthorne had built an empire on arrogance and corruption, and in the end, none of it could save him. And now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this story? Did Nathaniel Hawthorne deserve his fate, or do you think he should have fought back even harder? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss. Was justice truly served, or was this just another game of power? And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. See you in the next one.